You're listening to the Her Money, Her Business podcast. This podcast is for women starting or growing their own business and features episodes about money management, reducing financial stress, and how to grow a profitable business that's built to last. We want to see women in business thriving. So if you avoid discussing money, lack confidence managing money, or want to struggle less while making money, then you're in the right place. Let's make finance fun and money matter. I'm your host, Sonja Balzarolo, and this is the Her Money, Her Business podcast. Hello, welcome to episode 15 of the podcast. Today, as I record this episode, it is the 8th of March and it's International Women's Day, a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women. So the day also marks a call to action for accelerating women's equality and accelerating gender parity. So I want to tell you a little bit about International Women's Day in today's episode and give you a bit of background on it if you don't know much about where it's come from and the path that we've taken to get here. But then also I wanted to talk about what we can do ourselves in our daily lives, and particularly around education and how what I do links in with my feelings and passion towards helping women in business. So first of all, did you know that International Women's Day has occurred for well over a century? I didn't actually know that until I researched this. So the first International Women's Day gathering was actually in 1911, and it was supported by over 1 million people in Austria, Denmark, Germany and Switzerland. And since then, every year, obviously, it's built up to what happens today, where International Women's Day is celebrated all around the world, and it's a global community. The theme this year is Break the Bias. So whether deliberately or unconsciously, any type of bias makes it difficult for women to move ahead. And not just in obvious ways or out in the workforce, it's also for women in business for themselves. Because bias is actually feeding into our mindset around our value, our worth, our capabilities, and our ability to earn money and run a successful business of our own. And so contributing to something like International Women's Day, and obviously not on the 8th of March every year, but in general as we go about our daily lives, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. So taking action and committing to helping forge an inclusive world, there's still lots to do. We've come a long way, and I'll talk about the path in a second, but there's still things that we can do, like forging positive visibility of women and celebrating women's achievements, calling out gender actions and assumptions, which we may not even recognize right now or realize that's happening, and challenging gender stereotypes, discrimination, and any type of bias. I think it's also really important if you're a mum, particularly a mum of young girls, to share this information and messaging with them as well and have discussions around this. And if you see things happening that are, stereotypical and biased, for women or girls or females in general, have that discussion with your young girls so that this path forward, they're actually recognizing that that is not the right thing and that they can recognize it for themselves. Because I think part of the problem is that we just aren't aware of some of these things. And so I think just having discussions around this really helps bring it out into the open even more than it has been done so far. So I wanted to share with you something I came across when I was doing a bit of research for the podcast today. And this is the path that we've come along so far. As I was reading through this, I really recognized a lot of the stages that we've been through in the past little while. I've been in business for over probably 30 years now, whether it's in corporate and organisation or running my own business for the last 6 years or so. And I really recognise some of these stages. So the path so far, women's rights and the concept behind International Women's Day started with the activism stage, and that was around the late 1800s, early 1900s, and obviously with International Women's Day gathering starting in 1911 as well. So it was really focused on securing the right to vote and equal pay for equal work, and that was the basis of the activism that first started back then. So women's voices and participating in government and gender pay gaps, they were actually obviously the largely remaining key issues today, well over a century later. The next stage that we moved into was feminism, and that was the 1970s. So there were obviously rallies, protests, lobbying, and that was for inclusion, influence, and equality. And those challenges were for women against the system and also society. So even other women were challenging this, women that weren't on board with the feminism era. So then we moved into the 1980s, and that was really what they call Fix the Women programs. Sounds interesting. It was trying to help women become more confident, visible, and well networked. So reinforcing the notion that women needed to act more like men and to fit into existing structures and organisations to be able to succeed while still running a home. And so that was the era of the shoulder pads, the power suits, the high heels, the loud voices, being an extrovert. So trying to get women to fit in, basically. That was the Fix the Women era of the 80s, and I remember that very well. Then the change, the organisation era, was the 1990s and the 2000s. So that really started to get things moving in the right direction, focused on organisational development. So changing the structures was a question that people were asking. If we change the structure of how we're doing things, will women then thrive? So getting women into the boardroom, having diverse recruiting strategies, the LGBTQ plus and diversity, so going beyond gender. Women's conferences and networking started to really increase, and gender-related research started to increase as well. So we started to really have new terms and phrases and data to back up what needed to change around women's rights. And so then in more recent years, we've moved into the men as allies stage. And lots of men have become advocates and champions of change, and it's become a major trend in accelerating women's equality. So CEOs and leaders in positions were publicly committing to diversifying to challenge stereotypes and biases. So now we're at a stage where the world expects inclusivity. So movements like Me Too, Time's Up, and real female-focused initiatives does mean that gender is firmly on the agenda for organisations. So organisations face scrutiny from their candidates, their consumers, their communities, investors, media, etc., if they're not getting on board. So stereotypes, discrimination and bias are more likely to be called out, and it's more likely that the world will notice its absence and celebrate its presence. Gender roles are definitely becoming more fluid, and men's roles in society becoming more varied. So we're expecting diversity, equality and inclusion in our communities and in our workplaces. So what does that mean for us? Most of the people that listen to this podcast are actually in business for themselves. So what I wanted to talk about today is talking more about how this relates to you as a woman in business running your own business. So we're asked, to take action and break the bias, and obviously we want to do those things. We want to call out those things, so we want to address it when we can, when you feel comfortable to be able to do that. What I wanted to really talk about today is recognizing it in yourself and addressing it for yourself. So as you work in your own business, I believe that we are still very much pulled into the idea of what's happened in the past. And it's very easy to drop into those old beliefs and ways of doing things, and actually unconsciously discriminating against yourself and making yourself feel unequal in comparison to how you hold others accountable, creating bias towards others instead of yourself, and even stereotyping yourself. So I want you to recognize if this is happening and call yourself out. Be self-aware and work on this for yourself first, and then you're also going to be more in tune to seeing it happening in your own environment. So how can you recognize in yourself that you are stereotyping, discriminating against yourself, putting bias towards others instead of yourself, etc.? So here's a couple of things that you might recognize in your self-talk. I can't manage money. My partner, bookkeeper/accountant does it for me. I can't afford this, or I'll go without. I'll do the insert whatever household task you think of. My husband works hard, or it's easier if I just do it myself. It'll be done better if I do it myself. I don't have enough experience to apply for that job, promotion, or work with that client. Not asking for a pay rise or putting your rates up with your clients. Not charging enough for what you provide. celebrating your wins and recognizing your successes, or not doing those things, not taking calculated risks with your business, your career, holding yourself back or staying in the same comfortable position, burning ourselves out by doing too much and not asking for or getting help, and letting clients manage us and make our decisions on our pricing, our delivery, our deadlines, when they pay invoices, what your payment terms are, etc. So they're just a few examples of ways that you could be discriminating against yourself. Do you recognize any of those things? While a lot of the current stats, as I mentioned, and the stats that I can see online, they're all based on organisations and discrimination against women within organisations, etc., which is obviously important to have data on that. But there's not really a lot out there that talks about how we can make a change and contribute to taking action as women in business. Women in business are important. There is more and more women starting their own businesses every single day. And so it's important that we also have ways of contributing to this as part of society and change for women in general. The things that we do in our communities really help move the women's movement, if you like, forward. And I'm probably not using the right wording for all of this. I'm not an expert by any means. This is just my opinion around all of this. So when we are in business, we do things like we provide jobs and work to other women. We give back to our community. We manage our businesses well. And yes, we are good with numbers when we invest in educating in ourselves and in financials. We support our employees and our contractors. We look after them. We consider their health and well-being. We promote a healthy and rewarding work environment and relationship. We're driven by heart, community, supporting others rather than running on power and privilege. We're mentoring and guiding others that are coming through, other women in business. We celebrate other women and we collaborate over competing. And more likely, we're also more aware and inclusive in general. So I think it's really important that we consider that we are really contributing to expanding women's reach, women's visibility in the business world and the corporate world versus the entrepreneurship business world is, the gap used to be huge. It's becoming smaller as lots of women leave the corporate environment or organizations and actually set up their own businesses. So we are contributing a huge amount, and it's growing every year, to society and to women working in an equal and a gender parity way in our society. But I want us to just make sure that as this happens and as we provide this amazing support system for other women in business, that we're also recognizing how important and amazing we are as women in business for ourselves, and that we are not continuing to put other people ahead of us, and that includes other women in business, that we are really looking within ourselves, being aware of, are we discriminating against ourselves? Are we stereotyping ourselves in those ways that I mentioned before? Stopping ourselves from building successful businesses, from making great money, from expanding our abilities and growing long-term sustainable businesses. And also to consider that the way we show up is great leadership for other women in business, and certainly if you have daughters, to show them the way as well. I can't tell you how many times in my past, because I come from a corporate career, so I definitely know that I bring a lot of this mindset stuff with me. And, I am human. I continue to have challenges around being a woman in business and running a successful business. I can't tell you how many times in my career and over my lifetime I have been given labels and things that are, that move towards gender equality, inequality, stereotyping, discrimination, those sorts of things. So you might recognize some of these phrases like, I'm too bossy, I'm too loud, I'm too sensitive or emotional, I'm too passionate, outspoken, confrontational. And thinking things like, what will they think of me if I do this? Who do I think I am? I can't do that. I'm not good enough. I'm not good with numbers. My kids need me. I can't do that, say that, tell people that I believe or that I am that. So all of those things at some point I have dealt with in my career, or I have said to myself over time. And they can be considered, discriminating against ourselves, holding ourselves back from doing things because we believe things that have been said or happened in the past. And moving forward and taking action and creating equality and gender parity is, like I've said, also about dealing with those things ourselves and recognizing it and seeing it in ourselves first, and then being able to recognize that in our environment and taking action and calling it out as well in our environment and for ourselves. So I hope that's given you something to think about. I've not necessarily provided lots of action today other than really self-awareness and self-assessment. But I hope that gives you a bit of insight. I hope that you enjoyed the information around International Women's Day. I know I certainly enjoyed reflecting on that and really considering how things have changed along the way and where we're at now, and recognising there's still a long way to go for gender parity. But we definitely can see that the path that has been tread, I guess, before us has been an amazing one and has come a long way. So that's it from me for today, and I will talk to you on the next episode. Bye for now. Inspired to take action? Head on over to our website, blossomingbusiness.com.au, for this episode's show notes and access to all of our resources. You've been listening to the Her Money, Her Business podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. I'm Sonja Balzarolo, and until next time, keep striving to make finance fun and money matter.